Welcome to Chapter 2 of the M-Step Administration Training. In this chapter, I will discuss the tasks that need to be done during testing. First, I will discuss how to get started with the test administration, and then we'll dive into tasks done during test administration. I will also spend some time going over common problems that come up during testing and how you should address them, and end with resources that are available to you and how to find them. As we get started, it's important to identify the responsibilities of assessment coordinators during the test administration. The most important responsibility is communication. The assessment coordinator is the central point of contact between test administrators, technology coordinators, OEAA if there's anything that needs to be addressed with us, and DRC. So, making sure everyone is on the same page as far as testing schedules, building or district policy, student testing devices, and so on is very important. Next, the assessment coordinator is a resource to answer questions that will come from test administrators, proctors, technology coordinators, or other school staff. Assessment coordinators should monitor for test irregularities and either lead or provide support for any investigations, help with submitting incident reports if necessary, and gathering any documentation that is needed. The other responsibility included here is the need to monitor during testing. Make sure that test administrators are administering the test in accordance with their training and are following required policies and procedures. This includes making sure testing rooms do not contain queuing materials, student devices are managed appropriately, and the building cell phone and electronic device policies are followed. Also, the assessment coordinator manages printing and distribution of test tickets, as well as the secure handling and storage of all secure materials. Finally, assessment coordinators can monitor test completion in the DRC Insight portal. The test administrator's directions and manuals have all of the test administration policy information that test administrators need to know. They have the calculator and scratch paper policies, information about supports and accommodations, handling of secure materials, and information about incident reporting. Test administrators are required to read the test administrator's directions and manual document for the test mode, grade, and content area for all tests they will administer. Test administrators' directions and manual documents are specific to test mode and grade. This means that there are separate documents for online testing in each grade, and separate documents for paper/pencil testing in each grade. TTS for directions is required for all online tests. The test directions include directions for launching the Insight application, handing out test tickets, and the test selection, welcome, and audio check screens are completed together. Test administrators must follow the directions provided in the test administrator's directions and manual document. With the requirement to use TTS for directions, updates have been made to the functionality to ensure students listen to the directions at least once per assessment. On all direction screens, the next button is inactive on the screen, and they are required to listen to all directions before they are able to move to the next screen. This will ensure students hear all required directions and don't skip through them. The system will record the directions as having been listened to once the student selects the on the last directions screen. Once they have selected that button and been delivered the first test item, if they pause the test for longer than 20 minutes or need to log in during an alternate test session, the student will not be required to listen to the directions another time. In addition to the requirement to use TTS for directions, the test directions have also been revised. We've received consistent feedback that the online test directions are too long and redundant, so we revised them for clarity and brevity. This impacted several screens. The answering question screen was revised for both clarity and more student-friendly language. The navigation screen was revised so that it no longer includes directions for basic items, such as the cursor. This screen now includes directions on the navigation of unique item types on each assessment. Before, every test had 2 full pages of tools directions, and Grade 11 Science had 3. Those pages have been removed, and the Helpful Testing Hints screen includes a brief list of sample tools with the direction to use the Help button for more information. If you'd still like to provide the directions for each tool available on the test, you can use the Insight Tools poster, which is linked here. For paper/pencil testing, test administrators follow the directions that are in the test directions and manuals documents. There were no changes or revisions to paper/pencil directions. All test directions are read and followed explicitly to ensure a standardized administration of the test. Next, I'm going to spend some time going into some policies and procedures and tasks that need to be done during testing. First, make sure that everyone knows the scratch and graph paper policy related to the tests that they will administer. All used scratch and graph paper are secure materials. These documents will have specific test content written on them, and they must be securely collected and destroyed after testing. Make sure that students do not turn scratch paper in by passing down rows, or in any method that would allow a student to view what is written on another student's paper. This is secure information. Test administrators should collect scratch and graph paper individually after testing. If a break is taken during testing and a student will resume the same test and test part a later time, then in order for his or her scratch paper to be able to be returned, it will need to have the student's name on it. Make sure that your test administrators require students to write their names on the top of their scratch paper or graph paper when they hand it out. That way everyone will have access to what they need throughout the test. Graph paper is allowed for grades 6 and 7. It must be blank graph paper. M-STEP graph paper is delivered to schools with the initial materials according to pre-ID counts, and it is also available on the M-STEP webpage. The M-STEP scratch paper policy is in appendices to the test administrator's directions and manuals, the test administration manual, and it is posted on the M-STEP webpage. The calculator policy has not changed. Grades 3, 4, 5 cannot use a calculator, even as an accommodation, because it changes the construct of the test. And grades 6 and 7 calculators are not allowed for anyone on Part 1 of the paper pencil assessment. For students in grade 6 and 7 testing online, the calculators are embedded into the assessment on items for which they are available, and handheld calculators are only allowed as an accommodation. Calculators are allowed on the science assessment for all items, on both parts in all tested grades, and 11. For grade 5, students use the basic calculator, and grades 8 and 11 use the scientific calculator. The electronic device policy is an appendix in the test administration manual, assessment integrity guide, and in all of the test administrator's directions and manual documents. There are specific requirements for students and staff. On this slide, I will review student requirements. On the next slide, I'll review staff requirements. First, students are not allowed to use, wear, or access any non-testing electronic devices. This includes all cell phones, smartwatches, Bluetooth headphones, or any other electronic device or Bluetooth device. Some students may have medically necessary devices. These should be left with the test administrator. If this is not possible, then the test has to be administered in a one-on-one setting. It is also important to note that students are not allowed to access the device they use for testing for any other purpose than testing during the test session. This includes after they have submitted the test. They cannot use the test device to access anything else as long as the test session is ongoing. For staff, the primary focus is that test administrators and monitors have to be focused on active monitoring at all times. Specific information about what active monitoring means is provided in the Test Administration Manual Appendix and in the Assessment Integrity Guide. Staff are only allowed to use a computer to monitor testing during a test session. Test administrators cannot be working on grading, lesson planning, or any other activity not related to test administration. Disruptions must be avoided as much as possible. Cell phones should not be used unless there is a special circumstance that requires alerting staff or an emergency. Wearable technology is discouraged, but if it is worn, it must be set to airplane mode. Finally, test content can never be recorded or photographed in any way for any reason. It is important that test administrators actively monitor testing. This will help reduce the potential for any testing irregularities, and it will ensure that all students are provided a quiet and orderly environment for testing. Active monitoring of a test session looks like a test administrator who is moving through the room unobtrusively observing students while testing. The test administrator should maintain a view of all students at all times, and all of his or her attention should remain on testing at all times throughout the test session. It's also important that test administrators and proctors avoid doing anything that could distract a student from testing. Things like talking to other staff members. Even if the conversation is work or testing related, this needs to be avoided. Reading books or newspapers should absolutely be avoided because attention must remain on testing at all times. Eating, working on computers or a phone, or grading papers are all potentially distracting to the testing environment and should be avoided. Some schools use video surveillance cameras in rooms that are used for testing. For safety and security, If video surveillance cameras are already in place in a testing room and are used to maintain security, they are allowed to be used during the test session. Cameras should be directed away from test items, and any recording of a test session must be deleted as soon as possible after the test session. The Assessment Integrity Guide is updated each year. I'm going to highlight a few important topics here, but it is required that assessment coordinators read the entire document before test administration. On this slide, I will highlight another reminder of the electronic device policy, academic posters, and the arrangement of student workstations. Student cell phones or other electronic devices must be powered off and stored away from the student work area during testing. It is the responsibility of district and building assessment coordinators to be sure test administrators are aware of how your district or building will implement this policy and that this policy is enforced. All academic material that is posted on classroom walls must be covered or removed during the test administration. Make sure you emphasize this in your training. It is something that MDE has seen in several instances. This is a testing irregularity that requires the student's tests be invalidated or completely retaken, which is not an ideal situation for anyone. And computers or workstations must be arranged so that students are not able to view other students' work during testing. All test administrators must be trained in the administration policies for the M-STEP administration, read the Assessment Integrity Guide or complete the Assessment Security Training modules, and read the test administrator's directions and manual documents before administering a test. They must also sign the OEAA Security Compliance Form before administering any M-STEP assessment. Test administrators are selected from the list on this slide, which is taken from the Assessment Integrity Guide. Test administrators can be teachers or other licensed educational administrators, paraprofessionals or non-licensed administrative personnel, or substitute teachers. Anyone who administers the test must complete the required training and complete the OEAA Security Compliance Form before administration. If test administrators are using the test monitoring application, they will need to log in to the DRC Insight portal before beginning the test session to allow students access to the test. Detailed information about setting up the test monitoring application was provided in Chapter 1 of this training, and you can find that information in the M-STEP Test Administration Manual, in the Test Monitoring Application Appendix, or in the DRC Insight Portal User Guide. This image shows how to access the test monitoring application during testing, and where test administrators find the monitoring code and allow access. The red arrow at the top of the page shows how to get to the test monitoring application. Users select the top of the screen and then select Test Monitoring, the drop-down menu. Test administrators may not have all of the options listed in this screenshot, depending on their access permissions. Next, the monitoring code is highlighted on the screen. This is the code that students need to enter on their welcome screen to access the test. The button to allow student access is also highlighted. Once students have been provided access to their test, this is what the test monitoring dashboard will look like, with student information obfuscated. The test administrator can view student name, assessment, testing status, and progress through the test. This screen monitors test completion for all students. It displays tests that are not started, in progress, or completed. It does not monitor testing during test sessions. Users can monitor test completion in the DRC Insight portal, on the student status screen by grade and by content. Users can monitor progress toward completion throughout the test administration using this screen. As a note, the screen shows progress toward completion of students who are assigned to test sessions. It does not identify students who are expected to test by the MDE, but were not assigned to the test session. Assessment coordinators must make sure that all students who are expected to test are pre-ID'd in the secure site and assigned to all of the appropriate test sessions, either through the secure site or in the DRC Insight portal. When ending a test session for an online administration, all test tickets, test rosters, scratch paper and graph paper if used, must be collected individually from students to be securely destroyed. Test administrators should also be sure that students exit the testing engine. In paper/pencil administrations, test booklets, answer documents, scratch paper and graph paper if used, should be collected individually. These documents should not be passed down rows. Be sure to verify that all answer documents, test booklets, and scratch paper are collected from all students. Test administrators must verify that all materials are collected before students are dismissed and the test session ended. All secure materials are then returned for secure storage or destruction. Materials need to be collected after the test administrations for both online and paper/pencil administrations. Be sure that signed security compliance forms are collected from all staff involved in test administration. Also, final copies of testing schedules must be completed and collected. These should be kept for 3 years after the test administration. For paper/pencil administrations, all test booklets and answer documents must be collected. Any used answer document must have the correct barcode label affixed, and any accommodations used need to be filled in on the answer document. Also be sure the student information is completed and matches the information on the barcode label. In the event the barcode label becomes damaged or falls off the document, the test administration manual includes detailed instructions for materials return. Things come up during testing. There can be student behaviors that impact testing. Students sometimes submit a fixed form test by accident or have trouble logging into the test. If you have any problems during testing, there are things you can do to resolve the issue, and you'll be able to find information for how to resolve most issues in the TAM. But remember, we are here to help you ensure that you have a successful test administration that results in valid test scores for the students in your building. Do not hesitate to reach out to us for support when you run into any challenges. Most of the time, we can help you get things back on track with minimal impact to testing. So in this section, I'm going to highlight the most common types of things that we see and what you should do if it happens in your school or district. Use this appendix in the test administration manual that provides more detailed information about what to include when submitting an incident report for the 4 most common incident report types we receive each year. Test not completed, prohibited behavior, issues with accommodations or designated supports, or technical problems. Use the appendix to facilitate faster handling of incident reports and to make sure that all of the required information is included. Page 2 of this appendix is a table of the allowable reasons for regeneration of the test. This table includes links to the required parent notification forms. Use those forms when submitting the incident report for faster resolution of the report. Those forms are also available on the MSTEP webpage at www.michigan.gov/mstep. Perhaps the most common problem that happens in the online administration is a student submitting a test before completing it. When this happens, if there are 5 or fewer questions answered, contact the call center at 1-877-560-8378 and select option 2. They can get that unlocked for you. If there are more than 5 questions answered, then an incident report is required. Just submit the incident report, and we will review it and contact you to help you resolve the issue. Remember to use the appendix in the test administration manual to be sure that you include everything that's needed. Another common problem is if a student becomes ill or is removed from the test session before completing the test. For an online administration, collect the student's test ticket and instruct the student to pause and exit the test. The test may be resumed in a later test session using the original test ticket. For a paper/pencil administration, the test administrator should collect the test materials and flag the last question answered. The test can then be resumed during a makeup session. Students testing on Chromebook who have the wrong keyboard setting, US International Keyboard, will not be able to use the quotation marks or apostrophes while in text boxes. To resolve this issue before testing begins, choose Settings on the Chromebook, then choose Keyboard Settings, and be sure US Keyboard is selected. If this happens during testing, have the student click outside of the text box, then press Ctrl-Shift-Spacebar, which will bring up the option to select the US Keyboard setting. DRC has also put out a new technology bulletin on the Chromebook keyboard issue, called Keyboard Settings and Tips for Chrome OS and iPad OS devices, so characters display correctly in DRC Insight. It provides step-by-step instructions to force all Chromebooks to have the US keyboard setting, so that this issue does not occur. The bulletin is in the DRC Insight portal. Go to the Documents tab and then filter on Audience, District Technology Coordinators. In the online administration, there may be an issue with Insight disconnections or other technical errors. This can be due to a local connectivity issue, or a network issue, or it may be an issue that needs to be resolved with DRC. So, the first step in any situation of a technical issue while testing online is to contact your local technology coordinator. If the technology coordinator cannot resolve the problem, then they should contact DRC customer support, and if necessary, the district assessment coordinator should submit an incident report if the problem cannot be solved by the technology coordinator or DRC's customer support. Be sure that students are not directed to continue testing while experiencing any technology difficulties during testing. MDE does not unlock or regenerate tests due to unaddressed technology issues after a test has been completed. I've just gone through a few of the most common scenarios that can come up during testing. Make sure to review your test administration manual if you encounter these or any other issues during testing. During testing, things come up and you may have a need to submit an incident report. It's important that you know how to handle this if it happens. First, a testing irregularity is any deviation from any test policy during test administration. There are many things that can cause a testing irregularity, and they're not necessarily that someone has done something wrong. Some examples of what a testing irregularity may be are listed here. Students could engage in prohibited behaviors, like using or accessing a cell phone or electronic device or copying or cheating on the test. Testing irregularities may be the result of errors with designated supports or accommodations, either if something was assigned when it should not have been or not assigned when it should have been. There are different ways that incident reports are resolved, and it is always specific to the events that occurred. But some things that might happen is the test could be unlocked or regenerated. The note here is to remind you that unlocking a test means the student can continue where they left off, whereas a regeneration erases all of the student's responses, and they have to completely restart. Or sometimes a test can be invalidated, such as being marked do not score or prohibited behavior. If a testing irregularity occurs, it's important that you follow these steps to respond to it. Start by getting the facts: what happened, who was involved, and what was the impact to testing. Next, get statements from staff involved when warranted. Once you know what's happened from all of the involved parties, then you submit your incident report. Incident reports should be submitted within 2 school days of the testing irregularity, or from the day you were notified of the testing irregularity. You don't need to have all of the documentation ready to submit before submitting the incident report. You just need to be able to describe the testing irregularity and who was involved. There are a few instances where the report must be submitted on the day that it occurred. In those cases, MDE understands that not all relevant facts or documentation may be available yet. That's okay. We can work with you to get everything after the report is submitted. Cases where it may be necessary to submit the report on the day of the incident are if there is some sort of major security breach, such as test content is exposed to non-testing staff or students, if a student posts test content on social media, for example. Or there are a few incidents that MDE can regenerate a test, but only if the report is submitted the same day as the test, for example if a student submits a test after spending fewer than 15 minutes in the test, or if a student completes the test without taking prescribed medication. The incident reporting guide that is in the test administration manual can help you through this process and give you some ideas about what to expect for a response. Testing irregularities are reported in the OAA Secure site. Log in, then select the Student Assessments menu, and then Incident Reports from the drop-down menu. The TAM's Incident Reporting Guide and How to Complete an Incident Report appendices include all of this information in detail, so be sure that you review those sections of the TAM before the testing window begins. But here I am going to highlight some important information from the Incident Reporting Guide. First, I want to highlight that any testing irregularity is expected to be reported within 2 school days. Either within 2 school days of the testing irregularity itself, or within 2 school days of you being notified of the testing irregularity. Remember, you must report all testing irregularities. Do not neglect to report a testing irregularity if it was not reported within 2 school days. This is to ensure that irregularities are reported in a timely manner, so that we can work with you to appropriately resolve the issue. Next, I want to highlight the requirements for incident reports that are due to an error in the administration of a designated support or accommodation. These are the most common incident reports we receive, and the vast majority of those incidents are incidents where a student completed a test without a required designated support or accommodation. If a designated support that should have been provided wasn't provided, Then the school must submit a signed form from the parent indicating the reason for the need to retest and permission to retest. If you have been involved in this type of incident in the past, then you will be aware that MDE has a template that you use to provide the parent. You complete the grade/content area/designated support, then the parent decides which option and signs the form. This form is available on the MSTEP webpage at www.michigan.gov/MSTEP. Under the Current Assessment Administration, select Incident Reporting. There is also a link to the document in the appendix in the Test Administration Manual. Next, the educator who is responsible for day-to-day instruction in the content area needs to sign a statement that affirms that the student uses that designated support as a part of daily instruction. There is not a form for this. The educator can write or type a statement as simple as, "I affirm that," uses, and list the designated support as part of daily instruction, also include the content area, and then sign the statement. For testing irregularities where an accommodation that is assigned in the student's IEP or Section 504 plan was not administered, the signed parent form is still required, and you will also need to upload the appropriate page or pages from the student's IEP or Section 504 plan. Only upload the page or pages that indicate required testing accommodations. Please note here that something that is considered a designated support on MSTEP can be administered as a required accommodation, such as TTS items only. This is technically a designated support for MSTEP, but an IEP team may include TTS or read aloud as an accommodation on the IEP. In situations like these, then this is a required accommodation and the procedures for accommodation should be followed. There are 3 instances that require the incident report be submitted on the day that the irregularity occurs in order to regenerate the test. The first instance is if a student becomes ill and goes home on test day. This is for those situations where a student sits to complete an entire test, then you find out, or figure out later that the student was ill enough to have to go home sick that day. Again, the incident must be reported by 11:59 p.m. on the day it occurs. The second instance is when a student begins a test and submits it while spending fewer than 15 minutes total in the test. Again, you must submit the incident report on the day the irregularity occurred. The last instance is if you have a student who has prescribed medication but does not take the medication on test day. Again, it must be submitted on the day of the irregularity. There is required documentation, but before I get to that, remember you can submit the incident report without this documentation so that it is submitted on the same day, and then gather the documentation after the incident is reported. You just have to get the incident submitted on the same day. We can help you with getting the documentation in a timely manner, but only if you initially submit the incident on the day the irregularity occurs. So for all of these situations, you need documentation that the parent is providing permission to take the test again. This is required in any instance of a regeneration. Next, you need to submit verification of the incident. For students who become ill, this should typically be an attendance record indicating the student went home ill. For students who didn't take their medication, a statement from a teacher, staff member, or parent who has reason to know whether the student took their medication is sufficient. And for students who spend fewer than 15 minutes testing MDE, can verify through the DRC Insight portal. Once the test has been submitted, MDE can only see the time spent testing after the test has been submitted. Also, in any instance of regeneration of a test, documentation of parent notification and permission is required. There are different forms necessary for each of these 3 specific instances. You can access the forms from the MSTEP webpage, in the Test Administration Manual, or if you submit the incident report without the form, then the incident responder will attach the form to their response for you. Incident reports are submitted through the secure site. Users select the Student Assessments tab at the top of the page, and then Incident Reports in the drop-down menu. The contact information is pre-populated based on the MSTEP Assessment Coordinator, who is assigned in the EEM. Once you have selected the test cycle and entity information, select the grade, content area, and testing mode. Based on these selections, the incident category drop-down will update. Then select the incident subcategory. Directions about which category and subcategory should be used, based on your situation, can be found in the Incident Reporting table in the MSTEP Test Administration Manual. This table is organized based on the incident categories listed in the drop-down menu of the secure site. After you have selected the category and subcategory, You can select your requested action. Depending on the incident category and subcategory that you've selected, student names may be required. Student names that are populated are based on students who were pre-identified for testing. Then, a description of the incident is included. Once you've included all of the information about your testing irregularity, be sure to your incident report. If you do not submit the incident report, MDE cannot respond to your incident. You can find more information about how to use the incident reporting tool on the Secure Site Training page at www.michigan.gov/Secure Site Training. Here I'm going to remind you about some of the resources that are available to you before, during, and after testing. If you get a chance, go to the MSTEP webpage at www.michigan.gov/MSTEP and look through the documents there. There is a lot of good information available, and it's sorted according to what's new, the current assessment administration, supports and accommodations, content-specific information where you'll find information about the ELA test, or the science test, and so on. There are also sections for assessment training, reporting, and more. So it's organized into the topic of information that you might be looking for. Take a look. There's a lot of information out there. The MSTEP Test Administration Manual includes detailed guidelines for before, during, and after the MSTEP test administration. The Test Administration Manual provides information about the test administration policies and procedures, as well as step-by-step information for each assessment task that needs to be done before, during, and after testing. Checklists are also provided in an appendix, with links to each task, to help you keep track of everything that needs to be done. You will also find test administration policies, including the scratch paper policy, calculator policy, and electronic device policy, information about supports and accommodations available for the MSTEP assessment, and the incident reporting table that includes potential test irregularities and their resolution for both paper/pencil and online test administrations. Test administrators are required to read the test administrator's directions and manual for the grade and content areas they will administer, according to test mode, which means online or paper/pencil. All of the information that test administrators need to know, including policies, requirements, and the scratch paper and calculator policies, are in these documents. Test administrators are required to read the document before test administration for the grade, content area, and test mode, online or paper/pencil, they will administer. Test administrators' directions and manual documents are included in initial material orders according to pre-ID counts. If additional documents are needed, they can be printed from the MSTEP webpage at www.michigan.gov/MSTEP. Remember to make sure to visit the MSTEP webpage at www.michigan.gov/MSTEP for more resources. I'm just highlighting a few of the most important things that are out there for you now. The updated Assessment Integrity Guide is available. The AIG contains important information about test security and mandatory assessment administration guidelines for all Michigan state assessments. The new Assessment Coordinator Training Guide provides training on each task to be done for administering Michigan state assessments, organized into before, during, and after testing. The lists of important dates are available as PDFs, Google Calendars, and as the Excel spreadsheet. These are all accessed through the MSTEP webpage by selecting List of Important Dates in the Current Assessment Administration section. This takes you to the Assessment Calendar page that includes all formats of important dates. The Approved Insight Tools poster is also available on the MSTEP webpage. This is the only allowed poster that schools can post in the classroom during testing to cue students on the use of the tools in the online assessment. Remember, this poster can be posted but not at each student's desk or workstation. There's a lot more. Take a look for yourself at www.michigan.gov/MSTEP. Make sure you're signed up for the Spotlight. This is the place to go to find out important information about assessment and accountability throughout the year. It comes out every Thursday afternoon. If you aren't already signed up, go to the MSTEP webpage, www.michigan.gov/MSTEP. Scroll down until you see the Spotlight logo, click on it, and you can sign up there. Thanks for joining me for the second chapter of the 2024 MSTEP Administration Training. Our contact information is available here. If you have any questions, send an email to md-oeaa@michigan.gov, or you can call 877-560-8378 and follow the prompts. Also, if you have ideas, suggestions, or ways that you manage your test administration tasks that you think other schools might find helpful, send us an email. We include those in Spotlight articles, and all of the helpful hints that you see in the TAM came from tips from folks from the field. Let us know what's working for you. There will be another chapter of this training to cover what needs to be done after testing. Make sure you watch the Spotlight for when that is available. Thanks for watching.